Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM, the official podcast of Monsters.rent. I'm Justin Lewis.
And I'm Tanner Wayland.
And we are here to help you tell better stories for yourself and your players as you dungeon master sessions of D&D, Dungeons & Dragons. We'd like to give you some quick announcements. We actually have one before the show, and then after the show, if you want to stick around, we have some more announcements then as well. But first, let's talk about this. Tired of being alone? Are you tired of not having any of your players understand you? Are you tired of never truly belonging? Well, you're in luck. All you need to do is join the Guild. The Guild is a unique and exclusive experience that is only open to Dungeon Masters. It is a full community focused on helping ease your DMing burdens. Want to meet other DMs? Join the Guild. Want to discuss your homebrew ideas with people who would appreciate it instead of just telling your cat? Join the Guild. Want to find a place where all your wildest dreams will come true? Join the Guild. Go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free. Wait, that can't be right. Chuck, can you check this again? Is this supposed to be... What? Oh, they're serious? It's free? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, go to monsters.rent/guild and sign up today for free, even though they are crazy for giving this away for free. Common side effects may include burping, sneezing, laughing, breathing, hearing, listening, tasting, farting, critting, sarcasm, and in extreme cases, explosive diarrhea. Awesome. With that out of the way, we can get into today's show. Welcome back. Hello there. I'm Justin Lewis here with Tanner Wayland today.
Oh, hey, Justin. Sorry, I was just looking at something on my desk, and I was like, "What's that doing there?" Hi, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. It's a good day today because today we are talking about Dungeon Master Boredom. So 2 weeks ago we talked about Dungeon Master Burnout, and 2 weeks before that we talked about kind of keeping excited as a Dungeon Master. And this is really the second part in that two-part series of trying to keep your excitement up as a DM. And we found that it's really two sides of the same coin. Either you get burnt out as a DM, or you just get bored as a DM. And to be honest, they are fairly similar in terms of symptoms, in terms of how you feel, but I think they're slightly different in terms of maybe some of the prescriptions. So naturally, the first question is, what causes Dungeon Master boredom?
Yeah, that's honestly, I think that what causes it, typically, I find that not having enough variety in your DMing, because in the end, we're DMing a game. Games are supposed to be fun. Games are supposed to be varied and like provide kind of fun experiences. But we find fun in variety and in new things, and so if you're just constantly doing the same thing over and over again, I mean, you're going to get bored, right? That's kind of the definition of boredom.
Yeah, and even that I think can be like split out into a few different things. So like as a DM, you're doing the same things over and over again. But I think also players can start doing the same things over and over again. So maybe your players are getting bored, right? And that's kind of causing like a negative feedback loop.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's the energy in a session. If it ever is like, hey, the DM's providing most of the energy, then something's gone wrong, right? Because it's only fun once everybody's contributing their part. I think the golden kind of mean is like, hey, most like 90% of the people at the table are contributing, and maybe one person needs a little bit of help, and hopefully week to week it's a different person. but once if everybody is like, all the players especially are the ones that aren't doing much and they're kind of just on for the ride, then something's got to change.
Yeah. So okay, I think before we move on, let's also talk about kind of what does Dungeon Master Boredom look like? What does it feel like? I know from my perspective, boredom, it manifests when I am thinking about preparing for the session, and it's sometimes writer's block can also kind of be in this area of like, I don't know what to do. And there's just very low motivation to do it. Sometimes when I'm thinking of preparing, I feel like this big, like, like a weight. Like I don't, like holding me back from preparing. And sometimes I think the boredom manifests during the sessions when someone's doing something, I'm the DM, and my thoughts kind of wander, and I'm like, when is this session going to end? At least that's what it feels like for me.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. Like when I'm preparing and I realize that I'm not excited while I'm preparing, and it's not because like, ooh, this is going to be a lot. It's rather like, oh, if I spend a lot of my time thinking, how can I get the players more involved? Then that's kind of telling, right? That like, oh, apparently that's been an issue. And I've been feeling it, and maybe the players have been feeling it. And I can tell that I'm bored just with the preparation because I'm constantly thinking, it's like, oh, how can we actually make this interesting? On the other hand, if I'm in the session and, I find that I get very bored when I know exactly what's going to happen, like I do something and I'm like, oh, the players are going to act this way and it's going to take this many turns to finish the combat. And, I don't, maybe that's me asking too much, but part of me wants to have scenarios and situations where the players feel like they can add their own piece, right? And so many times when I've just planned everything to a T, or I've planned a scenario in a way that it's like, hey, there's really only one outcome, then it's going to get boring for me, for them. Well, maybe not for them, but for me at least, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like there are two categories of kind of DM-related boredom. So boredom that can sort of be attributed to the Dungeon Master, and then boredom that can sort of be attributed to the players. And when I say boredom, maybe it's lack of interest or things that are causing this boredom. Yeah. So let's start with the Dungeon Master. We said, one of the things is that they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. There's not much variety. So what would cause that lack of variety, in your opinion?
I would say one thing would be if you stop going to outside sources for suggestions, for help, for ideas. Nobody should be an island unto themselves where they never get help or suggestions, right? And so I think that, if you're listening to podcasts like this, I know that sometimes we say things that you've probably heard plenty of times, but, even just like learning things that maybe you've forgotten, or learning new things that you hadn't heard of, learning and seeing potential opportunities for growth, I think that that's a great way to fight you having a boring style of DMing. And I don't mean that in an accusatory way, right? I think everybody at some point in their life is going to DM in a boring way, and that's normal. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't do that, then we can't learn when we're prone for that and get better. So if you are, if your DMing style is boring and you're having any of those telltale signs we were talking about, then go outside of yourself. Go onto the internet. There's so much good advice out there. So many tools as well, and I think that's a huge first kind of way to help with that.
Yeah. I'm going to repeat what you said. Learning and opportunities for growth are one of the best ways to prevent DM boredom. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
I think that's so valuable. And, just recently in my own session prep, I'm a bit of a planner, but I'm also not. I'm a discovery writer, but I do not like improv, which is kind of this weird dichotomy. But recently in session prep, I would write like, if they do this and then this situation arises, like if they get thrown in jail, then they can ask one of the jailkeepers to let them out, and the jailkeeper will offer one of 3 scenarios. And I didn't expound on the scenarios other than saying they asked them to do a job, they asked them to kill someone, or they asked them to go find this thing. And those are all like low-grade side quests, right? That would require me to improv on the spot. So I think maybe one thing to do, like you were saying, with learning and growth is provide opportunities for yourself to go into those areas where you're less practiced, right? Like force yourself. If you don't know how to do underwater combat, make them go underwater and make yourself learn it. Or if you don't know how to do stuff in the astral sea, make them do that. Well, not make them, but provide the opportunities so that way you can learn and kind of have a new experience yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even I would argue, so let's say that you're in a situation where you have less flexibility, like a longer dungeon where it's all kind of the same theme. I think it's absolutely okay as a DM to kind of prod your players in certain directions. I know a lot of DMs do this anyway, but I think in the past I've been guilty of being like, oh, I'll see where they want to go, you know? But it's okay to be like, oh, there's a really interesting encounter over there with some mimics. I'm going to have a little child's voice, like kind of playing over there, you know? And then they go into search and then, you know, the battle happens. Versus, you know, just letting them choose wherever and they go into the other room where they fight, you know, a bunch of goblins for the 20th time, you know? It's okay to, if you're doing a pre-written adventure, to you know, pick and choose what you include, you know? And then if you're writing your own, never write the goblin encounters to begin with. Just, you know, provide some different choices of paths and make it so that each path ends in the encounter you want.
Yeah. In that way, I know there's a lot of controversy over whether or not dungeon masters should railroad. And for those of you who are new listeners, railroading is kind of this idea of your players are on this sequence of events that they can't escape from. They are on a train, they are on the trail, or the tracks, and they are going to the destination. Like the train, unless it falls off the tracks and things explode, they're not going to leave it. In my opinion, being a dungeon master it's a lot like, you know, being the driver for those safari cars at Disney World or whatever, going through the animal kingdom. Like, people have to have this feeling that they, or maybe this illusion that they can do whatever they want, and they can, but in the end, you as the dungeon master are the curator of the story. So if something they want to do is actually pretty boring, you let them do that, and then you curate the story so that way it's not boring, right? And you kind of need to pull the strings behind the scenes. And to that effect, my friend sent me this one TikTok reel or whatever, basically, and we all know that combat can sometimes be really boring. It can be a slog. This reel explained that a teacher was hosting this club for D&D at school. It was like middle school, I think. So during lunch, there was like 5 tables or something set up. And he found one table to be particularly interesting because the players were fighting a dragon, and the teacher kind of walked behind the DM screen, and every time the players would hit and do damage, the DM would be like, "Oh, that's awesome. You did this much damage. He's looking like this." And he would see that the DM wasn't keeping track of the health. And afterwards, the teacher asked the DM and said, "Hey, why did you do that?" And the DM said, "The dragon dies when it stops being fun to fight the dragon." And I think while with certain players you might not be able to do that exactly because min-maxers and things like that, you know, they play for that reason. But if you're in a combat and you've reached that moment, there's nothing wrong with adding in something new or changing it up to make the encounter more fun. Maybe the big boss dies, or maybe for some reason he splits into 2 and there's 2 of them now, and they have less health, but there's nothing wrong with, like I said, the players went where they wanted to. It's not as fun as they wanted it to be, so it's your job to add something or take something away to make it more like what they wanted.
Yeah, exactly. You as the DM, and I think that this is paramount to our topic, you have all the control in the world that you want. If something's boring, no one's gonna help it better than you. No one's gonna make it change better than you. And that's especially true of combat. I know that sometimes combats feel like, kind of a rote thing that you can't do too much with. That's not true. You can absolutely change up the scenario, change up the situation, split off the boss with one of the players, and then the other players have a time attack kind of thing where they're trying to get to the player and keep them from dying. Whatever it is, you have that flexibility. And kind of my last thing on at least how a DM can keep from being boring before we move on to the players. My last thing with like a DM should always have goals for how to improve. And I mean specifically, look at the different parts of play and the different parts of DMing, combat being one of them, role-playing being one of them, world building being another, and think like, hey, which of these is kind of boring to me? And just be objective in that moment, and then make goals, right? I said this in a podcast about combat tips, but if combat's boring, chances are you're not timing turns, and that's a simple goal that you can have. It's like, what, for this next session, for the next few sessions, I'm going to time every turn, and obviously keeping the rule of fun in mind, right? But I'm going to time turns so that things are more speedy and see how that works. And then for the next goal, it could be, I'm going to practice some different accents. I'm going to look up some videos online. I'm going to look up accent generators, and then that would make my role-playing fun. If you have goals, much as it is in life, you're going to find that your DMing is just a lot more exciting.
Yeah, I completely agree. To that effect, I think there, like I said before, there are places in dungeon mastering that we don't go because we're uncomfortable or we feel we're not prepared. In my opinion, those are exactly the places you should go. You should definitely not feel afraid of failing, trying a new accent, because your players are going to laugh at you, and while they're not laughing with you, they're laughing at you. That's totally fine. That's great. We're there to make it so ourselves and the players can have fun, as long as they're not laughing at you in a very mean-spirited way. But like Tanner said, take some time to identify those areas where you can improve, even down to, this particular rule gives me a headache, or this single accent is super hard for me, or I don't know how to use this one NPC, and then practice that, and do it in a very free-spirited way, so your players are aware that you haven't, tied your ego to it, so that way they can laugh at it, and you can laugh, and everyone can have a good time. So moving on to kind of the next aspect, naturally, Dungeon Masters, we have our whole slew of things to do to make sure we don't get bored, but our players can sometimes not try as hard as they could. So the next question is, how do we get our players to maybe give a little bit more to the game? Yeah.
I think a key part is making sure that you have the environment where players feel like they can add to the game, right? You talked about railroading, and a big reason why people are against railroading is because a lot of times when a player tries to do something different, the DM makes it so it just doesn't work, period, because it doesn't work with their big vision. For example, a player that's a rogue, you're in a town, and instead of focusing on kind of the mission, quote unquote, the rogue's like, hey, I go out every evening and I rob a house. And you're like, do I have to play this out, or do I just give them free money, or what? And it's not in your plan, so you just stress about it, and then the player can tell that you're not really making this either easy or enjoyable for them, and then suddenly you've hit an impasse, and then that player knows, okay, from now on I'm not going to try things like that, So they have to feel like whatever they want to try, you're going to try and play ball, so to speak, and make it an interesting, fun experience, whatever it is.
That particular example is fascinating to me because it's one that is so probable, yet even as you say it,
well, it happened to me. That's why I was like,
even as you say it, I'm like, what would I do? Like, because that's essentially either you come up with a full list of different houses and different scenarios, or, you know, like, so I'm curious, what did you do in that instance?
I don't think I did it well. Like, I think for the first, like, 2 times, I actually, like, pulled up a house layout, and I tried role-playing it, and it just wasn't super great because I wasn't prepared. Mm-hmm. I also didn't love the fact that I was like, these are just harmless villagers, you know? And I wasn't having fun with it, which if I had, looking back, you know, now that I'm past that phase, if I did it, I would have totally had him run into the house of, like, just the scariest, like, serial killer huntsman, you know, who's just, like, sharpening an axe while there's, like, a bleeding out dead bear on the ground, you know, and he's like, I was getting bored, you know, something like that, right? Instead, I was like, I've got to be real to the thing, you know, and these are just villagers. And of course, then it kind of took the fun out. Because in my mind, the thing I was worried about is, like, I just don't want to give this player a bunch of gold because they happen to be in a town that's lower leveled, that, you know, most of the random villagers aren't going to be doing, you know, aren't going to be really versed in self-defense. Mm-hmm. And so I overthought it, and I didn't make it as fun as I could have. Honestly, what I would have done, going back, like I said, is just be more flexible. Like, hey, if they're doing something that, like, okay, maybe it might give them some extra gold, throw in an extra challenge and make it fun, you know? I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. Or if you don't care enough, like, I think the other option that I probably should have done, since I wasn't in that kind of, like, really good improv mindset, I should have just had them roll. And if they got below a certain number, all the houses were locked. If they got above a certain number, they got in, got a couple pieces of gold, but then they got chased out. They rolled above a 20, you know, mm-hmm. Then they got plenty or something, right? Yeah. I should have been more flexible that way, but instead I was like, what's he doing? You know? Yeah. And that didn't work out.
Yeah. See, I think that's such an interesting situation because it brings in a lot of other aspects. So, for example, like, you might go the route of playing it out a lot more and kind of, like, developing that. I would only recommend that if your other players can sit still and listen for that much time. Otherwise, exactly. You know, roll, move forward. The other thing that came to my mind is when your players do something unexpected, it might be a good idea to also do something unexpected with what they're doing. So, like you said, like, you know, I in my mind, I took it a step further. You know, they robbed 2 houses. The local authorities are getting wise, and so they start looking for this robber, right? And then the third house is actually someone who just murdered someone. So, like, you break in and you see a dead body and a serial killer, and either you fight the serial killer or you don't. But if you do, the local authorities start, like, you know, the next day they praise you and they're like, hey, let's give a medal to this person. Meanwhile, they're like, wow, you have a lot of gold. And kind of that idea of, like, they're starting to look at you a little bit more critically because they're looking for this robber. Anyways, kind of that unexpected aspect. The other thing I would add is with reward comes risk, right? Yeah. If they're going to get a reward, there needs to be some sort of risk. So with your idea of the rolls, if they're going to get money, like they roll above a 15, they get money. I'd say if they roll below a 5, they might get thrown in jail, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And they lose a lot of money getting the bail or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I love that example. Like that's probably the best example in, like, the last 10 podcasts we've done, just because it's so perfect, because it's going to happen, right? And it's like, what do you do? So and I think I love your suggestions because it's like it shows a
fluidity. And one thing I would have told my younger self with this is be like, hey, for the first session, just make it goofy. Maybe give them more than they'd expect. Not like a whole treasure load, right? But give them a bit more than you'd maybe want to. And then between sessions, think it out. Think about, hey, how can I do this in a way that's unexpected for them? Because they pulled one on me. What can I pull on them that isn't just necessarily completely bad? Because you don't want to like punish them.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make it fun. And I like your suggestion about like, hey, they actually got into the house, they caught the person, and then the town's they're a hero now. But now everybody knows their face. So if someone goes and gets robbed by them, the police know where to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I love that. And I think that, if you have a hard time responding to players' creativity, what I would do is you're going to have to practice it. But also, if it's a longer form creativity kind of thing, and players are like, hey, I'd like to do this, then find a way to postpone it. Have an NPC be like, oh, you want to go to that bridge? And in your mind, you're thinking, I haven't planned the bridge. The bridge is nowhere in my mind.
Right.
Then have an NPC be like, oh, actually the river overflowed the other day. However, I hear in a day or two it should be down. And then after that session, you go and plan something that you're like, fine, let's make this actually really fun instead of something that I'm throwing together last minute that I'm sure I might show some of my impatience or my, my lack of being flexible with, right?
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with like asking your players outright. Like, I'll be honest, this might have broken the immersion, but our last session, the players, like, the session ended with them outside the city walls of Waterdeep planning to go inside. And so I literally said, I ended and I said, okay, next session, you will be going into Waterdeep because you already said we're going into Waterdeep. So I want to know what are things you want to do in Waterdeep, and I literally went around the table and I asked them and I wrote it all down. And over these last few weeks, I've been preparing and, things like that. There's going to be stuff that they didn't tell me or whatnot. But at least this way, when they're like, oh, I want to go sell this dwarven funeral mask, I'm going to be like, cool. You go to find, and I'm going to have kind of an answer that makes them feel, honestly, it makes them feel important because they're like, oh,
Yeah, I'm more immersed as well because you've had time to prepare.
Yeah.
That's great. Honestly, I agree. I think a big part of preventing boredom from like the aspect of the players not contributing is asking them what they'd like to do, right? If you ask them their plans, their hopes, their goals for their character, then you'll be able to prepare for it and you'll be able to give them something really good in return.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of other stuff we could add. We're actually kind of running up on time. So last thing I would say is if your players are not contributing in the way you'd like them to, sit down and have a chat with them. And if needed, have just a session with just them so they can really get to feel what it's like to have the spotlight on them, and have fun like that. But try those two things and see if that helps. Anything else you'd like to add, Tanner?
Yeah. No, I think that we've said it pretty well. And in many ways, while we give specific tips, there's certain types of feels to what a creative and an energizing game is like, right? Mm-hmm. A creative game is, and an energizing game is one where you can feel the DM getting better session after session. It's one where you can feel like the players are contributing in the creation process and they're being heard and communication is just flowing both ways, right? And whatever form that takes, great. But if you're able to do that, then I think you're going to have a hard time getting bored.
Exactly. So thank you for listening to today's show. We hope that your boredom or burnout disappears. And if it does or doesn't, let us know. Go ahead and reach out to us on Instagram at HowToBeABetterDM. We'll be back next week for another amazing episode. But until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Thank you for listening to today's show. We really appreciate your support and your patronage. We have a few more announcements to go over. First,
did you ever fall in love with the library as a kid? It was a place where you could experience 1,000 stories without having to buy 1,000 books. That is what Monsters.rent can do for your D&D campaign. You can rent and swap out as many quality miniature monsters and creatures for your D&D party as you could ever want, without having to buy them. You can rescue villagers from a kobold camp, or lead your party through the Fighting Forest, or many more adventures. We're coming out with new bundles all the time. Just sign up for our subscription to get access to your own personal library of minis. Go to monsters.rent to find out more. That's the website. monsters.rent. Get your library pass to a world of minis today.
We also wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Stardust and Dragons. I'm going to let one of the cast of Stardust and Dragons, Christian Hatcher, and his crew tell you a little bit more about it.
This August, a new adventure podcast is coming to a platform near you, filled with action,
You one of the two of them. We can't keep taking hits like that.
drama,
Everything that she's been doing, everything she's going to do, finally sets in.
and stardust.
Help! Help! Someone, please!
Find out more about this epic odyssey at stardustanddragons.com, where adventure awaits in the stars.
That's all the announcements we have today. Again, thank you so much for everything you do for us. You make this show possible. Like we said before, we'll be back next week with another great episode, and until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative.